As we all know, one of the keys to having a competitive city is building a city that has a housing stock that is viable, vibrant, well-located, and available for residents of all incomes. Now, we have a wonderful public housing stock. It was built according to styles and ideas of the past, and that idea today does have some limitations. And starting in the 1990s, we began to rethink this kind of way we were building public housing and adjust that. And as you've seen earlier in the conversation, people are looking at Brownsville. We are partnering right now with the Brownsville Partnership, working with them to think about ways of adjusting the very large amount of public housing that is there and how to build a much stronger community. One of our leading collaborators in this, of course, is the New York City Public Housing Authority. As you know, it is the largest public housing authority in the United States, and it is the most effective and efficient housing authority in the United States. And it houses 630,000 people. You know, that's bigger than the city of Boston, the city of Baltimore, Denver, Seattle, and even Washington, D.C. That's our public housing population. And we have here today, to kick off this session in thinking about public housing, our leader, Chairman John Ray. The Observer recently called him the New York City Housing Authority's mayor, traffic cop, garbage man, and teacher. He's a busy man. Please, John.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. I want to first thank Eugenie and Ven for inviting me back this year to say a few words and for making public housing a central theme of this summit. I am very appreciative of that, as are all of the residents that we represent. I understand that my goal is to be brief. And so I will work very hard to do that because this panel of Rosanne, David, Derek, Nancy, Joachim, and Vicki have some really exciting things to talk about, and I'm actually very anxious to hear from them directly. I like to just plant a seed. First of all, I do want to acknowledge too my vice chair of NYCHA's board is here today, Emily Yusuf. So Emily, thanks for being here with us today as well. I want to plant a quick seed though, and that's that. There is a balance, and we can strike a balance between two extremes. You hear about public housing needs to be completely preserved and maintained. Don't touch it. Don't do anything to it. It's too vital a resource to quote unquote mess with. And then you hear the other extreme, which is that it's got so many challenges that we should just eliminate it and start over. And so I'd like to plant a seed that there is a third way, a potential for a balanced approach. But that balanced approach needs to acknowledge a number of things. First and foremost, here in New York particularly, but across the country, we do need to re-envision public housing and the way that it serves its residents. The infrastructure is aging dramatically. 75% of our buildings here in New York are more than 40 years old and increasingly distressed. There's an ever-growing need for additional affordable housing in the city. You heard Dan Doctoroff and others talk about the city continues to grow and attract new residents every day. We believe another 1 million people by 2030. And so we need to work hard to accommodate additional affordable housing. And NYCHA and public housing communities can play a role in that. And lastly, that these communities, although in many ways very vibrant, have been inwardly focused and disconnected from their broader communities for far too long. On the other hand, large-scale demolition and displacement is not practical here in New York City. As Jeannie mentioned, there are over 630,000 people who rely on NYCHA for housing, and they have very few housing alternatives when you consider that the average rent is $425 a month. There's extremely low vacancy rate in New York City. There are political impediments to broad-scale displacement, and the social cost on families would be incredible, particularly many of our vulnerable populations like seniors and youth, young children. Give you a number that you probably can keep in your mind. Replacing public housing in New York would cost somewhere between $40 and $50 billion. $40 to $50 billion to demolish and replace it. Yet preservation of it is probably somewhere between 5 and 10 billion. So obviously 5 and 10 billion is a challenge in and of itself, but it's certainly from an economic standpoint a much more manageable hill to climb than 40 to 50 billion. So I, again, would just leave where I started, which is say re-envisioning it is possible. We believe a couple of elements. I'm going to name 3, and then I'll turn it over to the panel. Many NYCHA communities are underbuilt, and it gives us an opportunity to grow. Through infill development with mixed income, market rate, and affordable housing, including a significant amount of supportive housing for our special needs populations like seniors. Second element, opportunity to substantially green both the infrastructure and the community as a whole, not just more trees, parks, and active design elements in the new construction, but also broad-scale energy retrofits for the facilities and the housing that currently exist today. And then third, we can't do this alone. Substantial community partnerships with not-for-profit organizations, as well as other community-based organizations and the private sector as well, to really not only support our families, but to pull off the financial challenges of truly redeveloping our public housing communities. So those 3 key elements, development, sustainability, and partnership, hopefully will be what's discussed on this panel, and I think we're in for a treat, and thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, Chairman Rhea, for those remarks, and more importantly, for the creativity and entrepreneurial energy you bring to NYCHA, which is the NYCHA properties are absolutely critical to the diversity of our city and to the livability of our city. And we are lucky to have the leadership and energy of Chairman Rhea and his entire team. So thank you. So we're going to talk today to segue off of Chairman Rhea's comments. We're really going to talk today about the fact that it's fair to say that many cities in the United States have developed public housing 30, 40, 50 years ago with a Robert Moses-like inattention to design, architecture, and the wishes or needs of the community. And we are now faced in many, many cities with the challenge of bringing that housing and the neighborhoods that host it into the 21st century. So our job today is really to think about some of the tools and challenges of doing that. We've got an absolutely terrific group of out-of-the-box thinkers and doers to talk that through. And so I'm really looking forward to what they have to say. So beginning on my right is Derek Ballantyne, and Derek is a real estate consultant and former CEO of Toronto Community Housing, which, as many of you know, is renowned for the quality of its work and the way in which it has rebuilt parts of Toronto. Joachim Hamou, a visual artist who's based in Copenhagen. David Baker, the founder of a San Francisco-based architecture firm, David Baker Plus Partners. The 2012 Jane Jacobs Medalist for New Ideas and Activism. We're very proud of that here at MAS. Rosanne Haggerty, who is the founder and president of Community Solutions, and the internationally renowned Common Ground, one of the world's leading providers of supportive housing. And last but not least, Nancy Biberman, the founder and president of Women's Housing and Economic Development Corporation, WEDCO, located in the Bronx. Each of our panelists is going to begin with a very brief overview of some of the work they've done to revitalize the communities in which public housing or other distressed housing was based. And then we'll turn, if time permits, to a more general discussion among the panelists. So without further ado, Derek.
Right. There's a slide that comes up? Or?
Yep, there it is.
Right. So I thought I'd start with this photograph because Toronto, like many North American cities in the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s, saw public housing as connected to and part of large urban renewal initiatives, solving a whole host of problems. And on the top photograph to your left, you see the hope being expressed by a family moving to the brand new public housing community just adjacent to the downtown core. About 55 years later, we're repeating that same story. So what we built in the 1950s and 60s lasted for pretty much one building cycle, and we're starting again. So obviously, it's with great concern that we're thinking about what is it that we might have done differently 60 years ago, 50 years ago, in building public housing communities and building place. And in Toronto, we sort of identified 13 large-scale communities that needed regeneration. Some complete replacement, some infill, some recapitalization. But the starting point for all of this was, in fact, spending a great deal of time building community capacity and not speaking about design, plans, architecture, and urban expression, but spending a great deal of time on what sort of outcomes the community was looking for. So while there are probably three components that we were most concerned about, one, the quality of housing, second, the quality of place, we were really focused on outcomes for people and what, in thinking about public housing and changes in public housing, what we might produce. So the investment in community engagement, and we started typically in a community that may have 7,500 residents, about 2,500 families. These numbers are also, in public housing, you're never quite sure what the numbers are. And we probably came face to face with about 70% of those residents in 14 different languages. And from that, we're able to build up a set of principles and a set of ideas, which then later found expression in urban design, in architecture, and in fact, the interior design of the buildings themselves. And if you want to see the sort of full story, I think it's available. You can search it through the web and Mass will have it. But it's probably three big ideas that came out of that work and which I think are being perfected now. One is that you cannot do this successfully and without huge risk about a future that needs renewal unless you actually engage the people living there in what the outcomes are for that community. Secondly, that there is a need when thinking about public housing not to think so much about the buildings themselves, but about the infrastructure in the neighborhood and the community. So what are the places of social interaction? What are the places of social capital building? And it's not your unit or your house, it's about a whole host of other services. And how do you build in diversity? And that in all segments of tenure, of rental tenure, income, types of business, creating places of employment in those spots. And finally, I think one which is not yet resolved, but one is about what is the longer-term management of these communities? Because I think a lot of what happened to public housing communities was not so much the seminal ideas, but what happened later through changes in public policy, the difficulty of managing place-specific and to community standards in large and cumbersome systems that are fraught with other dynamics and other pressures on them. And it's not the fault of that system, it's just the inability to really be responsive to community and place inside those systems.
Thank you, Derek. Joachim?
Okay. Thank you. I will try to do this. I have to read my iPad here because I can't do it as fast. Okay. So, sorry. Yeah. This is La Tour de Bois le Prêtre, sorry, outside of Paris, or on the outskirts of Paris. This is the tower in 2009, before construction started. The owner is the Paris Social Housing, and the tower sits next to the highway ring around Paris. And on the other side, there is a small cemetery. So it's quite depressing sight, actually. It has 3 different sizes of apartments, ranging from 2 to 6 rooms. Yeah. The architect Frédéric Drouot and his associates made the pledge that they would be able to keep the tenants in the house throughout the renovation, and that they would be able to keep the rent stable despite the renovation. In other words, to avoid losing the tenants in rehousing or higher rent. This was done by making a retrofit that was independent in its structure, so they could put the shell up, keeping the tenants inside. Big floor-to-ceiling windows replaced the old small windows, and the whole structure and window replacement only took 2 months, and it's all off-the-shelf material. Then 10 apartments were kept free in the tower for replacement for the tenants while their flats were being worked on. This gave the tenants the opportunity to follow and monitor the renovations. They could choose different floor types and layouts, among many things. Original doors and radiators, you can see in the corner, were kept in order to keep the costs down. And the retrofit have multiple benefits, such as sound reduction, air climate, and storage. But the most important is the temperature regulation it makes. It reduces or increases the outdoor temperature with 45 to 50 degrees. This, together with the renovation of the heat pump in the house, reduced the heating expenses with almost 60%, and that again kept the rent down. There is a lot more, but you can check all that out online. There is a lot of material on this. So the tenants in Tourbois-le-Prêtre now have this wonderful building with an amazing view and still a cheap rent. But most important, they have the ownership of their house. They followed the evolution, they were involved in the decision making, and they could make their own choices. And unfortunately, this is where the success ends. The owner were not interested in continuing the engagement with the tenants that finally had gained a voice. There were no one taking care of the community space that has been created in the building. And if the tenants want to use it, they have to get the key from the owner, who are not even present in the building. During my last visit around in this house, one of the tenants told me, for a year or so, I learned to know all my neighbors. Now I don't know them anymore.
Thank you, Joachim. David?
Hi, Michael Kimmelman yesterday was talking about that we should think beyond the building. So I'm going to just give an example of a project we worked on in Oakland. It's called Tassafaranga, named after actually a naval battle the United States lost. This is, you can see the public housing there. There's the grid of the city, and there's the public housing. It was noted for being dangerous. It was gated and fenced. Also, there were assets such as a school, a library, and a rec center, which were very difficult for kids to walk to because the streets didn't go through. So we replaced this, and I know that New York can't do this, the 50 billion. Well, maybe we could do that if we didn't do other things, but we spent the money, I guess. But and I think that renovation is a tremendously positive direction. Here we removed much of the site. It was 87 units before. One of the key things here was increasing the density. Went up to 179 units. We connected the urban street grid, and not only connected it, which allowed kids to walk to the library and school, but and to the rec center. But we opened the site, and it's interesting that Jane Jacobs, one of the big allies in that, and this is a community process, were the police, the Housing Authority police, who had taken this course called Security Through Environmental Design, which is kind of a Jane Jacobs boot camp. And so they were like, yeah, we don't want fences and gates because we can't climb over the fence like the person we're chasing. Anyway, so we opened it up, and there was concern among the management people because, but it's been a tremendous thing because people can go through the site. Now, but that doesn't mean, well, actually I'm going to say that yesterday I toured Brownsville, and we're talking about visible change, positive change, and that can be something really simple, like banners with residents' pictures or a farmer's market. One of the things, I think architecture can do that too. There's that 5% more than the engineering solution that is generous and cheerful and welcoming. So we did that. We kept proposing things, and this community center, which has a dragon's back green roof, we said, gosh, what do you think? And everybody said, oh, we love it, do it. Another aspect of that was doing, there was no green program here. We entered a US Green Building Council pilot program for LEED. This became the first gold certified LEED plan in California. And then we made all the buildings LEED platinum while bringing the project in under budget. Had a lot to do with the recession, I must admit, but it was good. We'll take credit. Now, the other thing that we're talking about here, though, is that tangible good. How does that multiply? Because you can't, I don't think you can go into a place and just do one good thing. And you see this, there's like one little thing, and it just doesn't spread out. There's not enough effort. It doesn't have a multiplier effect for good. And this is a really wonderful thing that happened off the site, off the property. There's a park there. There's a woman who grew up in the neighborhood, didn't use the park because it was dangerous. They used to be a drug dealing area. She was in the military. She got back, founded a nonprofit called Acta Non Verba, Deeds Not Words, started farming, has kids come in from the local school 3 days a week. That's their first harvest. Her name's Kelly. She's standing by her pizza oven that's warm from the Eat Real Fest. Great. And the kids sell the vegetables to the residents of the neighborhood and of Tassafaranga, and all the money they make goes into a bank account for their college education. And this is something that we had nothing to do with. As a matter of fact, the OHA, she came to the OHA and said, could you help me out? And she said, no, why don't you do it yourself? Because if we do it, Park and Rec is going to ask us for a lot of money. So Kelly went and did this all on her own. So that's just one example of multiplying for good with a positive vision.
Great, thank you, David. Rosanne?
Thank you. Community Solutions works in Brownsville, Brooklyn, which is the neighborhood with the densest concentration of public housing in the city and the country, we understand, with 10,000 units. And we've taken a collective impact approach to this community's challenges, which means that initially we set about recruiting many of the most creative and effective not-for-profits in the city to come join us in working in Brownsville. And that task of creating a functional civic infrastructure really had to be undertaken before we could begin really envisioning how the neighborhood could be transformed. And what we've been very mindful of throughout is that this needs to be a collaboration with and for residents, city agencies, not-for-profits, and local institutions, and working toward creating achievable, measurable change. And Brownsville, as you may know if you're a New Yorker, is one of the city neighborhoods with the most challenging social problems. It's a neighborhood with profound educational failure, very serious chronic disease burden, among the most violent neighborhoods in the community, and with a whole host of related problems. And so it would seem like one of these communities, to quote Dan Doctoroff, that really needs a big leap, and a big leap here to reinvent this community with and for residents, I think could have amazing implications for the rest of the city in the way we think about the potential of these neighborhoods. But just to underscore what we see the principal task being, it's to improve Brownsville without displacing the families who live there, and to make those current residents the center of our efforts. And certainly there's no way, given the prominence and the dominance of public housing in Brownsville, that any kind of turnaround is going to happen in this neighborhood without NYCHA being at the center. And we're fortunate to have John Rhea and his team in place. And many of the ideas they've introduced in Manhattan and other areas where there are high values to the property, we think have particular resonance in Brownsville, specifically the concept of linking resident empowerment and employment and training with the activities around retrofitting existing buildings, and with the whole notion of an infill development strategy. So I'll quickly show a few slides. Oops, Brownsville, that first slide, very dense neighborhood, 10,000 units. This is Joachim's slide again, but I think if you or to compare, see, the buildings in Brownsville are very, very similar. That's Tilden housing that you see lined up there along the number 3 train. And so it's not much of a leap to imagine the relevance of this type of renovation strategy that leaves tenants in place and substantially improves the quality of the living environment, the health of the buildings, and the energy efficiency and financial sustainability. We've had a number of offers of very generous help from architects helping us to look at the zoning capacity of the sites, and without substantial changes in any demolition or displacement, from 700 to 1,000 new units of housing, much better open space, cultural facilities, and badly needed retail could be introduced. And then this gives you a sense of the kind of implications of a redesign strategy of reestablishing laneways and reconnecting those public housing blocks to the surrounding street grid, introducing new housing, retail, and cultural facilities, and improved open space. And I think just to close on the note that clearly the big leaps begin with small tests, and we very much hope to see by the end of the Bloomberg administration move in the direction of testing this infill development strategy linked to energy savings and job creation.
Thank you, Rosanne. Nancy?
Thank you. See if I can do this right. So I put this slide up here because I wanted you, I mean, we are all shaped by the cards, by the hand we're dealt, or the hand we choose to play. And this was what I saw when I first came to the Bronx nearly 25 years ago. And I was, one of the Bronx pioneers, I guess, among many who took on this Herculean task that was facilitated by the Koch administration to rebuild the Bronx. One of the messages that you see on that building and, has stayed with me and has been sort of my guiding mantra over the years is the importance of memory, the persistence of memory, the perils of demolition and abandonment that we ignore at our collective peril. To underscore the point, no amount of rebuilding, and the Bronx is virtually completely rebuilt today, can truly heal the wounds that were inflicted on a community like this, where today less than 30% of the kids are reading at grade level. So WEDCO's work, our first development was to rehabilitate an abandoned city hospital. There were lots of plans floating around to demolish it at the time, and we found that, to no one's great surprise, this building, even though it was abandoned for 20 years, it was and is, a beautiful building, and people cared a lot about it and were thrilled when, plans were afoot, with their participation. To rebuild it and to create an outward-facing building, a building with a core purpose of creating the social capital that we're talking about, a commercial kitchen that's a business incubator, a Head Start center, a home-based childcare microenterprise training program, and a school, school construction authority built, right next door where we have worked for the last 15 years. When we had the opportunity in our next building to build from ground up, this was a neighborhood, this literally where you are looking is where Jimmy Carter stood and surveyed the landscape, and said, oh my God, this very site, building called Intervale Green, is where the famous shootout scene from Fort Apache, the Bronx, took place. We decided, and this is sort of an architectural point that's worth making, we decided, because there was no context there anymore, that we really should look to history. What were the buildings, around there? What did they look like? And so we chose to build what we call a typical Bronx building, which is to say 5 or 6 stories, brick, decorative cornices, interior courtyards where kids can play. We were able to add, since this was 2007 and the technology was there, a green roof. It is an Energy Star, the largest affordable Energy Star building in the country. And this place has become a purposeful hub because of the retail space we created for an organizing effort that has created the Southern Boulevard, which is a retail corridor adjacent to it, a merchants association. It's where the home-based child care program training is taking place. And it's now, we train green cart vendors, and it is now the home of the Bronx Music Heritage Center Lab, and which leads me to this next slide. Music Heritage Center, what's that about? One of the things that we discovered through partnerships, and in particular with the Bronx African American History Project at Fordham University, that before the disinvestment and abandonment of the Bronx, the Bronx was a hotbed of music. There were at least 200 venues where live music could be heard. All these places are gone, and this is just part of the map. And, you know, lots of, you know, jazz, Latin jazz, doo-wop, hip-hop, you know, this was all born and music fused in the Bronx. And people have memories of this, and these memories are very important to them, and we have learned a lot from listening. And which leads me to our next development to break ground in 2013. The focus of this development is a place that will enshrine, a facility, a building that will enshrine Bronx music, become a destination where people can come see, you know, what the Bronx is all about in a very positive, joyful note. We're creating a charter school, a grade 6 through 12 charter school in partnership with Bard College. And there will be nearly 300 apartments, including 15%, which are set aside as live workspace for elder musicians who we will employ. So again, the whole bottom line point here is using historic memory, you know, really, you know, making sure that people in the community participate, but making sure that they know that we know, and collectively we know together, how important the past is to the present and future.
Thank you, Nancy. So I've been told that the sins of every speaker who ran over this morning are being visited upon this panel, but more importantly, are standing between you and lunch. So I've been told we have to move it along, but I urge all of you to snare the speakers at lunch and ask them the questions that you would ask them. The first question that I was going to ask, to be provocative, was that my reference to Robert Moses notwithstanding, the architects, the community designers who built the public housing that we see now were in most cases well-intentioned, trying to do the best with the constraints that they had. And so I was going to challenge the speakers to think about, how do we know that the designs that we've seen on the screen are not going to show up again in the MAS Summit of 2030 as bad examples of what we shouldn't be doing. So be provocative, ask them those kinds of questions at lunch, but thank you very much for our panel.